Good morning, good evening, according to your time zone, to everyone. This is Dr. Swati Chakraborty, and I welcome you all for the one brand new session for our Young Dialogue program, and that is being launched to know, motivate, and evaluate the importance, the impact of social media and IRD program, interreligious, intercultural dialogue issues, concern, and human rights background. And for today's presentation will be done by our intern and esteemed intern, Mritika Guha, and she is pursuing her master's program from University of Calcutta from the Department of Southeast Asian Studies. And she is also been very much interested into photography. With her interest point, I would really appreciate Mythica's all the presentations, flyers, and all the material and content she developed as a part of the team in our internship projects that have been integrated and started since 2022 from September. So now the floor is to Mritika, and she will give us the enlightenment in the field of the dialogue and the social media platform. Thank you so much, Mritika, for your time, and I
Thank you.
wish you all the best.
Thank you, and good morning, and good evening, or good night to wherever you're joining from. And thank you for joining, first of all. So, my presentation, I'm going to share the screen first. Ma'am, I think you have disabled participant screen sharing. Okay, just a second. Okay, so my presentation is on social media and the dialogue around sexual abuse. Now, I would like to provide a disclaimer first. Having chosen a topic of this stature comes with its own limitations, and I agree that the limitations are completely mine, and because of time constraints, it's best to acknowledge that I can only provide a very myopic view of this mammoth of a phenomenon. And in talking about this issue, I will be touching upon some of the more popular instances of this dialogue and how, through them, uh, uh, the dialogue around sexual harassment in general has emerged outside of the non virtual world, how it has manifested itself. So, I would like to provide a rationale on that. In lieu of this, uh, I would like to touch upon the evolution of social media, of dialogue on social media in general. So, social media is no longer used just to broadcast mundane details of everyday life or commodities as it once was. It is now used with an intent to build deeper connections and start meaningful conversations with like minded individuals to pursue and share their passions and collaborations to take action on issues important to them. In recent years, social networks have been significantly influencing public discourse and political communication in society. The desktop or laptop experiences shifted to mobile phones and tablets, and high speed wireless internet became more readily available in homes, businesses, and public spaces. The advent of social media apps facilitated end users to take their communities with them wherever they went. At first, social media existed to help and end users connect digitally with friends, colleagues, family members, and people they knew in general. Desktop access to bulletin board services such as CompuServe and Prodigy made it easier to grow free online communities without ever leaving the house. Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, and other social media services thrived in the mobile app environment. Technological improvements, specifically powerful in phone cameras, shifted the focus of mobile apps to videos and images. In addition to written messages, end users could now broadcast in real time. The first social media site, 6 Degrees, was created in 1997. It enabled users to upload a profile and make friends with other users. In 1999, the first blogging sites became popular, creating a social media sensation that is still popular today. After the invention of blogging, social media began to explode in popularity. Sites like MySpace and LinkedIn gained prominence in the early 2000s, and sites like Photobucket and Flickr facilitated online photo sharing. YouTube came out in 2005, creating an entirely new way for people to communicate and share with each other across great distances. By 2006, Facebook and Twitter both became available to users throughout the world. These sites remain some of the most popular social networks on the internet. Other sites like Tumblr, Spotify, Foursquare, and Pinterest began popping up to fill specific social networking niches. Social networks have been significantly, as I mentioned earlier, influencing public discourse and political communication in society. They are used for monitoring public online discourse, identifying positions of citizens, their arguments on political and social issues. Since our very internship, as well as the title of this presentation, includes the word dialogue, and it is central to this whole phenomenon, I think it is somewhat imperative to define it. So the general definition that is provided on the internet is that dialogue refers to a sort of discussion or communication which is used to resolve a certain issue. A more elaborate definition of dialogue was provided by scientist D. Bohm, which I have introduced and included in my presentation, which says, in a dialogue, however, nobody is trying to win. Everybody wins if anybody wins. There is a different sort of spirit to it. In a dialogue, there is no attempt to gain points or to make your particular view prevail. Rather, whenever any mistake is discovered on the part of anybody, everybody gains. It's a situation called win-win, whereas the other game is win-lose. If I win, you lose. But a dialogue is something more of a common participation in which we are not playing a game against each other, but with each other. In a dialogue, everybody wins. This is very important in case of dialogue, in case of the whole conversation around sexual harassment on social media. Social media can take on many different forms, including online application forms and message boards, blogs, social networking sites such as Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, Pinterest, viral image and video campaigns, and mobile applications that provide constant direct contact to a target audience. The social cognitive theory is very important in this regard because it analyzes social diffusion of new behavior patterns on terms of three constituent processes and the psychological factors that govern them. These include acquisition of knowledge about innovative behaviors, the adoption of these behaviors in practical, and the social networks through which they spread and are supported. Applying the above, we can see how social media, with its reliance on social networks, be tightly knit. Social media could work on implementation of mobilization of pre-social behavior or anti-social behavior. One of the biggest advantages of sharing stories on social media is the advantage of anonymity. Here, the very personal experiences and our opinions can be shared through the privilege of anonymity because it helps a person to freely express their opinions about topics which are considered to be taboos without jeopardizing their political or socio-economic image in the real world. It ensures personal safety. Anonymity invites engagement, particularly when disclosing sensitive or private experiences. It is very important, significant, beneficial for marginalized groups because they are safe to explore their identities and ideas that may be unwelcome elsewhere. Social media, pretty much from its inception, has served as a way to know about sexual harassment by diffusing and disseminating ideas, attitudes, knowledge among large population or target audience. It fosters safe spaces to share stories and engage in conversations about awareness on sexual violence. Now, in lieu of this, I would like to show two ways in which this whole conversation around sexual abuse has yielded itself. The first one is the offline outrage or outrage based on particular cases. These are triggered by contemporary and burning cases and manifest themselves in organizing mass offline protests such as rallies, demonstrations, street corners, etc. I have provided a case study on this. One of the most extensive uses of digital technologies and social media was witnessed in the nationwide protests in India after the Delhi gang rape case of 16 December 2012, making it one of the biggest gender movements that the country has witnessed. There were calls for social reform that were not based on cliches of being holistic, but on equality for men and women in opportunity and access in education and familial structures. The Delhi gang rape of 2012, which came to be known as the Nirbhaya case, took over the national consciousness for months and became synonymous with India's sexual violence problems. Rarely had the country ever come together to be glued on TV, radio, newspaper, and other forms of news dispensation, as was the case here. It is true that there had been similar coverage during uh, terrorist strikes across the country, such as 26/11 in Mumbai. In Mumbai, however, this case, rape case, seemed to strike as much, if not more, terror into the hearts of the masses because they felt personally concerned. On sites such as Facebook and Twitter, users vented their outrage, lending solidarity to the street protesters, demanding justice for the paramedical student who was battling for her life. Social media platforms were used to organize and call for rallies, marches, as well as disseminate news. Here, platforms such as Facebook and Twitter were used in manifesting offline demonstrations of dissent. Change.org, an online petition platform, received more than 65,000 signatures for an appeal seeking the intervention of President Pranab Mukherjee and Chief Justice of India, Altamas Kabir. On Google Trends, search volume index, Delhi gang rape and rape in Delhi and gang rape victim were one of the top searched phases in India, reaching a peak on December 20th, 2012. On Facebook, at least 10 groups were created to bring people together for a cause. A Facebook group called for a one-day Aurat Bandh, in which women across the country were asked to not to work or take care of their families until the issue is set right. Over 20,000 people were invited and 2,100 people agreed to participate in it. Keeps up popping up. Due to we come to the second part of how this dialogue around sexual abuse has yielded itself, and it brings us to online movements. Now, how were these online movements different from the offline movements? It was not based on particular cases, but a, a large issue in general at hand, not particular cases pertaining to the issues. Due to normalization of sexist behavior and sexual violence, the persistent low social awareness, pre-socio political power structure, and the insufficient channels for survivor support, cases of sexual harassment remain vastly unreported. This was the core idea that fueled movements against sexual harassment on social media. I have provided the instances of three very significant movements in this regard. The first one is Who Needs Feminism? Who Needs Feminism was a class assignment designed by 16 students enrolled in the Women in Public Sphere course at Duke University in 2012, which sought to problematize the negative associations with the word feminism. Using the popular social networking site Tumblr, they encouraged fellow students to post photos of themselves with signs explaining why feminism continues to be relevant in contemporary society, challenging dominant sensibilities found within the media culture, suggesting feminism is outdated and no longer needed. A typical Who Needs Feminism submission had several thousand notes indicating how submissions forge emotional entanglement between contributors and readers who like, share, and reblog the content. Tumblr blogs, which this is very important, contains no personal data and are often anonymously authored. Submissions, as I have provided this picture, it is an example of the kind of notes that were written in lieu of this movement. I need feminism because I'm not allowed to go on late night runs alone, which is a problem which is universal for pretty much all women, and it shows the pervasive nature of sexual harassment, throughout the world. It also talked about sexual harassment inside families, which were often brushed under the carpet, and how women had to bear with casual sexism in order to not appear problematic or as potential threats. Moving on, the next movement to the next movement, being raped never reported. In 2014, being raped never reported hashtag began to trend on Twitter after the allegation broke with Canadian news media of sexual violence by prominent radio host Gian Gomeshi. The hashtag, started by two female Canadian journalists, was a public response to those who suggested Gomeshi's accusers were lying because they had not previously reported their assaults to the police, and served to document the myriad of reasons why victims do not report sexual violence. Many users use the hashtag to share their own reasons for not reporting their assaults, creating an archive of 8 million tweets that document the prevalence of social media. I would like to sort of not differ, but slightly deflect from this presentation and ask you how much time I have left exactly.
Yeah, you can continue. Mritika, I will let you know. Yeah.
Okay. So, the Bean Rape Never Reported movement also brought up the issue of marital rape. It reflected, because it is marital rape is not even considered as rape in most of the in many countries, because it is hidden under the garb of the sort of where the woman's consent is hidden under the garb of the notion of this lawfully wedded wife, which I think is very important in this uh, case. So perhaps the most significant movement in igniting the dialogue on sexual harassment on social media was the Me Too movement. Me Too, two simple but powerful words, shook the world and brought the huge extent of sexual harassment into the open. Since its very origins, the impact of the movement have been numerous and far-reaching. In defining it, the Me Too is a social movement against sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and rape culture, in which people publicize their experiences of sexual abuse or sexual harassment by sharing their own experience. The movement's proponents make it clear just how common sexual harassment is. The hope is that if people are more aware of sexual harassment and how casually it is sometimes treated, then tolerance for it will decrease and support for victims will rise. The phrase Me Too was initially used in this context on social media in 2006 on MySpace by sexual assault survivor and activist Tarana Burke. The purpose of Me Too, as initially voiced by Burke, as well as those who later adopted the tactic, is to empower sexually assaulted people, especially young and vulnerable women of color, through empathy, solidarity, strength in numbers, by visibly demonstrating how many have experienced sexual assault and harassment, especially in the workplace. Burke argues that the Me Too movement works on empowerment through empathy by showing the world just how common sexual harassment is, and by telling survivors they aren't alone and are supported. After millions of people started using the phrase and hashtag in this manner, the expression began to spread to dozens of other languages. The scope has become somewhat broader in this expansion. However, Burke has more recently referred to it as an international movement for justice for marginalized people. It marked the beginning of a rallying cry against the pervasiveness of sexual harassment, and it hoped the end of years of silence over it. Some spoke out in the hope of justice, some in the hope of being heard, and some in solidarity. Though the Me Too movement had been around since 2016, it was reintroduced in 2017 when multiple women decided to come forth about the prolonged abuse they endured under American film producer Harvey Weinstein. And these individuals who came forth about Weinstein faced years of torture and abuse under his power, and some remained under the abuse in fear he would retaliate and fire them. This was first started on October 2017 when American actress Alyssa Milano posted on Twitter, "If all women who have been sexually harassed or assaulted wrote Me Too as a status, we might give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem," saying that she got the idea from a friend. The individuals who came forth about Weinstein faced years of abuse and torture under his power, and some remained under the abuse, as I said, in fear that he would retaliate and fire them. The movement, Weinstein denied the allegations and decided to take a leave of absence from the Weinstein Company. He was later kicked out by the board of his own company after multiple women came forth about Weinstein's sexual advances. He later resigned from his company and was stripped of many awards and medals he won throughout his tenure in the Hollywood business, in the film business in general. Weinstein bribed his victims with money in order to silence them, but many of the victims refused and came forth anyway. He used non-disclosure agreements, which is very important in this regard, and we'll come to that later, to silence these victims and let his acts go unnoticed to the public eye. Weinstein ended up turning himself in May of 2018 for sexual misconduct charges. He was then charged with rape and several other sexual abuse allegations. In May of 2018, he was released on a $1 million bail, but in May of 2018, New York indicted Weinstein of rape and sexual act on a woman in 2013 and 2004, and he pleaded guilty. He continued to face several trials of sexual abuse towards women and remained to plead his innocence against the allegations. In February of 2020, Weinstein was found guilty of criminal sexual acts in the first degree and third degree rape. Though he was cleared of most of the charges against him, Weinstein still faces up to 20 years in prison. This is one of the biggest stories of the Me Too movement, which was successful not just in case of how the dialogue was reignited and uh, how the how there was solidarity and how dialogue was initiated, but also in legal terms of it as well. There was I mean, outside of the virtual world, there was legal implications were there. I mean, implied on this. I mean, pro- sort of projected on this as well, used on this. I can't find the correct word. So, hashtags as a narrative device are very important in this regard, and they have been able to provide a certain narrative which was different from erstwhile narratives and is being called a digitized narrative. So it helps in three key ways. On a practical organizational level, hashtags allow the user to remain within the character limit while thematically link their tweets to others addressing the same topic. Scholars argued that this linking function threads together related conversations across media platforms, making broad connections possible. They create a collective account of the systemic and widespread nature of sexual violence. The hashtag itself provides a way for victims to speak about their experiences without having to directly say they were raped or assaulted, which is very important. In other words, hashtags work as a standing or placeholder for those who may find it articulating their script of coercion descriptive coercion, painful, or even impossible. So this may be due to a number of reasons. The linguistic constraints of it, the sort of saying, the grammar or the language that is used when articulating or when describing sexual violence are often derogatory and condescending towards the victim. So explaining and uh, providing detailed narratives of such, and sort of saying the word of the exact word associated with the form of harassment or violence is very painful, because it means that it often implies that the survivor has to go through that pain again while describing what had happened to her, going through that pain all over again. For example, I would provide an example, but I'm very sort of tensed about how much time I have left. If I have, I will provide an
Please,
example.
please go ahead, Mritika. If you're running out of time, we will continue, no problem. It's a wonderful
Okay,
presentation. I'm enjoying it.
thank you. Example, this is in lieu of the Being Rape Never Reported movement. One woman tweeted, "I was 5 years old the first time, set me up for years of silence, shame, drug addiction, and mental illness." Here, the user's experience is mediated via the use of the hashtag, which makes it clear what she's trying to imply without using the word rape itself, which is quite clear here. The last one is the linking of hashtags, the third key way in which hashtags are used as a narrative device. Is not only The linking of hashtags is not only discursive and semiotic, but generates public forms of mediated effect, jolts that travel through connected hashtag, creating a stream of stories joined together joined together experiences of victims felt and were unable to report, but are being documented en masse through the repeated reuse of the hashtag. Again, very important, it provides a documentation to a plethora, I mean, innumerable accounts. And I would like to provide a small data that it was recorded that just within 1 week of Alyssa Milano's saying that just a second, of Alyssa Milano's posting on Twitter regarding the usage of the term Me Too, it was tweeted almost 1.2 million times. The hashtag was used 1.2 million times on Twitter, and almost, I think, 12 million, uh, 1.7 million times on Twitter, and 12 million times on Facebook within the first few weeks. That was the magnitude of the Such was the magnitude of the movement itself. So there have been various recurring patterns and themes, of which I have chosen three that came out of this dialogue around social media, a dialogue around sexual abuse on social media. The first one, the most significant thing about these movements was the fact that the most significant thing about these movements was the fact that the accounts of sexual assault were not reportages, but victims' own narrative of their experience, which is something so very very important, because it often does get diluted. It has its reportages on sexual harassment has their own implications. It often gets diluted. It often fails to provide the sort of pain, the articulate the sort of pain that the survivor went through. And this sort of victim's own narrative of their experience forms provides a certain sort of intimacy of a one-to-one conversation, which is which was erstwhile done behind closed doors between very close peoples, or even if they were I mean, disregarded or not acknowledged, but they were always part of the conversation of how common this whole phenomenon is. So this provided a certain sort of one to one, it provided the intimacy of disclosing something so personal to the world and to people who had not one experienced it, or had no idea, or didn't have anybody talk about their experiences to them. Analysis of the movement pointed out to the prevalence of sexual harassment, of how, I mean, which this, I mean, is elaborated the next point. It also showed that in majority of the cases, violence was perpetrated by a known person, by a family member, by a family friend, which is which was erstwhile not always considered even around the, the dialogue around sexual harassment. It was always seen as a very alien concept of how women should be aware of people outside their known periphery. But it implied and it showed how women were not safe within their own peripheries in themselves. Another pattern or theme that emerged out of these movements was the notion of a victim, of a definition of a victim, which I felt like deserved its own slide. The conversations around sexual harassment in social media redefined and reconstructed the notion of a victim and the concept of victimhood. It aimed and was somewhat successful in the elimination of widespread practice of victim blaming, where the, through cases
Ritika,
like,
we have 6 minutes left.
yes, I will try. Ma'am, I do not think I will be able to finish within that time.
No problem. Then we can continue with the next. We will join here again. So in the same link, so you can
Okay.
continue. So
Okay,
I'm
ma'am.
going
Thank
to
you.
end this session, and Shumedha and Ritika will join. Same link. Okay.
Okay. Okay, just a second.
Okay.